Morning again, everyone.
Morning.
For those persons who have rejoined, we want to thank you for rejoining us. For those who have just joined, thank you for joining us. We are into this section of presentations. First, from Ms. Vera Useva, who is the workers' representative in the ILO Caribbean office, and she'll be looking at international labor standards and global good practice in relation to the formalization. And after Ms. Guseva, we'll have Ms. Cheryl Williams, who is a representative from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, and she will be addressing rights and responsibilities in transitioning to formality. And then we'll have probably, well, dependent on the demands, but at least half an hour of question and answers, and then we'll close. And so we are looking to close certain. We'll be handing over now to Vera Guseva of the ILO Caribbean office. Vera, are you on?
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
So, appears.
I think, I wonder whether you are seeing my screen.
Yes, we're seeing the screen.
Okay, great. So thank you. Good morning to you. And it's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you. It's the very end of the project, and I realized that I never made it to Jamaica in person, but thanks to our ICTs, I'm at least able to address you at this webinar and to talk about indeed international labor standards as well as some global good practices on the transformations from informal to formal economy. Indeed, very recently, or just last month, the Committee of Experts on the Application of Conventions and Recommendations published a general survey on several international labor standards, including Convention 189 on domestic workers. And it states that, unfortunately, most domestic workers are in informal employment. And by most, I mean 81.2% globally. And if we look at other sectors, because we know that informal economy can happen in any sector. So in other sectors, it is 39.7%. So domestic, well, when it comes to domestic workers, they are 2 times or more prone to finding themselves in the informal economy. So, and indeed, and it was already underlined in the opening session that informality is one of the main causes of the decent work deficits and for domestic workers. So domestic workers in the informal economy are not recognized nor protected under the legal and regulatory frameworks and cannot benefit from the effective implementation. So while not all domestic workers are in the informal economy are poor, there is also a strong overlap between informality and poverty. So I think that we all know that bringing any workers to formality can only be beneficial for workers as well as societies. But coming back to the topic of my presentation, and before I speak about some of the international labor standards, let me remind you what are international labor standards, because this is what ILO is known for. The organization is known for setting the international labor standards. And so they are conventions, recommendations, and to a less extent protocols are what are known to be international labor standards, what we call international labor standards. And these are instruments that are adopted at the global level by the International Labor Organization's tripartite constituents, governments, as well as representatives of trade unions and employers organizations, to set minimum working standards. A convention establishes minimum standards. And the difference between the convention, the main difference between convention and recommendation is that once the convention can become binding or when a country ratifies it, while the recommendation is not binding, and it serves as a guidance, and again, both of them are depending on whether ratified or not can serve as a guidance, but this is more true for the recommendation. So also for convention, with together with ratification, what comes, it comes that the country is to provide regular reports to the International Labor Organization on how the provisions of the convention are implemented. As was mentioned by Dennis, the most relevant convention that we are talking about, the Convention 199 on domestic workers, was ratified by Jamaica in 2016. So a recommendation, so as a non-binding, it can either accompany a convention, and in case of the domestic workers convention and recommendation, it is a recommendation that is accompanying convention, meaning that they should be read together and that there are more details, in particular on the implementation of some specific provisions that can be found in the recommendation. And in general, the ILO International Labor Standards, conventions, and recommendations cover a wide area of social and labor issues, including basic human rights, labor rights, minimum wages, industrial relations, employment policy, social dialogue, social security, as well as other issues. So indeed, when we talk about international standards on formalization and domestic work, it will be three instruments that stand out, and this will be domestic workers convention and recommendation. Number 189, the convention, and number 201 recommendation, as well as recommendation 204, or transition from the informal to the formal economy recommendation. These are the two, let's say, instruments that are in focus. However, what about other international labor standards? Does it mean that they're not applicable and that they're not relevant either to domestic workers and their rights, or to bringing workers from informal to formal economy? No, of course, this is not the case, and nearly, let's say, as for formal employment, many other instruments are supporting the formalization. For example, informality is closely linked to the subject matter of recommendation number 198. It is employment relationship recommendation, because recognition of the existence of an employment relationship is critical for formalization and for workers and employers to gain access to regulation that protects their respective rights. This is what I can say about these three instruments, and now a little bit more probably in detail about the domestic workers convention. In 2011, the ILO adopted ILO Convention 189 and its accompanying recommendation number 201 on decent work for domestic workers. These were the first international standards on domestic work. So the convention recognizes domestic work as real work and aims to ensure domestic workers enjoy rights equal to those enjoyed by workers generally, while taking into account the specificities of the sector. And this is, of course, the specificities are the place of work that is this happening in a household, or that is also that most of the workforce is the male, and indeed and also other specificities. So when the convention was adopted in 2011, trade unions in general, and of course in particular associations and unions of domestic workers played a fundamental role in achieving the adoption of both convention and recommendation. And we know that Jamaica household workers unions made a great contribution in the process. Indeed, there are two overarching and interrelated obligations on the promotion and protection of human rights of all domestic workers, as well as measures to ensure fair terms of employment and decent working and living conditions. So what else is in the convention? Because this convention is actually a very short one, and since 2011, it's a pretty modern convention, and it's written in a very simple and in a very simple language that is easy to understand, not only to lawyers, like for example, many of the earlier conventions, but also to let's say general population of the countries. So this table and it's really very short. However, it covers a lot of topics. Of course, it gives the definitions. It speaks to the protection of human rights, to the rights and as well as in particular to the right of freedom of association and the rights to collective bargaining for domestic workers, about non-discrimination in employment, measures to fight against forced and child labor in the sector, as well as protection against abuse, harassment, and violence, about terms of employment, about conditions for living, in particular for living domestic workers, on working time, on remuneration, on occupational safety and health, on social security, and I would speak about social security a little bit later. So again, protection for particular groups like live-in workers or migrant workers, private employment agencies and how to regulate the relations, and what are the obligations of the private and what are the rights and obligations of the private employment agencies, as well as consultate. Well, so a lot of topics. So this is a convention that covers all of the topics. And again, Jamaica ratified it in 2016 and is implementing it in the legislation, law, and in practice at the national level. Of course, it doesn't happen over 1 year. It takes time, and it is great to see that that development even over the last 2 years that I've been closely following this topic. So when we speak about the recommendation on transition from the informal to the formal economy, it provides, this is also, it is the first international labor standard to focus particularly on the informal economy and to point clearly in the direction of transition to the formal economy as a means to realize decent work for all and to achieve inclusive development. This recommendation acknowledges the broad diversity of situations of informality, including specific national contexts and priorities for the transition to the formal economy, and provides practical guidance to address these priorities. It clearly defines a broad and detailed scope of application to all workers and economic units, including enterprises and households in the informal economy. Such informal work may be found in all economic sectors and also in public and private spheres. Recommendation 204 calls on member states to pay special attention to domestic workers as one group that is especially vulnerable to the most serious decent work deficits in the informal economy. And again, this happens because of the setting in which the domestic work is taking place, as well as because of the lack of awareness and again, for many reasons. So this is the brief overview of this three, including, well, three international labor standards, one convention, and 2 recommendations. And if you're interested, I would encourage you to go to the website of the ILO and read them, because I think that they can provide some guidance as well as some inspiration in the work of a trade union, officer, trade union leader, or a trade union member. When we talk, now that we are talking about transition from informal to formal economy, we are indeed talking about what are the criteria. So what makes the difference? When can we say that this worker is an informal economy and the other one who can be performing same work, same tasks, and it can even be happening actually at the same workplace, but why we say that one is in the formal and another one is in informal employment. So as for, well, this is also specific to domestic work, and for domestic work, formality is measured by the extent to which domestic workers are covered by labor and social protection, effective social security, and the use of formal arrangements such as the use of written contracts, right? These are the very clear criteria, and this is what allows us to measure the transition and to say when this transition is happening. I think that also it makes quite a big part of the current project and and broader of the Jamaica Action Plan, as Roselle underlined that its end date is 2025, unlike this project, so there is some time. So that access to social security for domestic workers is of major importance. And in line with Article 14 of the already mentioned Convention 189 on domestic workers, member states are expected to extend social protection to domestic workers, including maternity protection. And again, domestic workers should enjoy these rights equal to those enjoyed by workers generally. Taking into account the complexity of social security systems, the Convention recognizes that it may take time to adapt them to the sector. And for this reason, the rights can be applied progressively. And again, I think this is what we seen happening now. Another point that was made by the convention is that social security payments should also take into account in-kind payments. There are important advances being made in extending social security to domestic workers generally. But while indeed the coverage in law is provided, it is more difficult to increase coverage in practice, and incentives such as tax breaks and subsidies can help promote registration to social security. Simplification measures are also important to ensure that employers and workers have the time and capacity to register and make contributions. So there is no single protection model that works best for domestic workers everywhere, but mandatory coverage instead of voluntary coverage is considered to be one of the crucial elements for achieving adequate and effective coverage under any system and in any countries. So of course, because of the vulnerable situation of domestic workers, mandatory coverage alone will not be effective. There should be other strategies like fiscal incentives, registration plans, awareness raising campaigns. And again, this is what we are doing here today, that will be targeting domestic workers as well as employers and different service providers. It is also important indeed that domestic workers are not isolated as a group and are integrated into broader policies aimed at reducing informal work in general. I think that this is what I wanted to share about the conventions. And if now we can have a look at some of the global good practices. And again, while preparing for the presentation and looking at various reports that make this made the studies on good practices and where states themselves as well as social partners practices. It was actually I was thinking this is what is happening in Jamaica. So we can very soon see Jamaica in the good practices list. Of course, efforts, as I already mentioned, to promote formalization in the domestic work sector include awareness raising campaigns, simplification of procedures for registration and payment of contributions to Social Security. It can be through digital platforms, as well as providing fiscal incentives to employers, such as tax breaks or subsidies. And in most successful examples, approaches combine incentives with compliance measures. Based on country experience from around the world, there are different measures which can be used by government, employers, and workers' organizations to reduce the high levels of informal work amongst domestic workers. And one of them is, for example, the use of written contracts. It can facilitate the formalization of the domestic work relationship. And it also puts the responsibility to prepare this contract, and it puts the responsibility on the party with great bargaining power, that is indeed the employer, even though we are talking about the employer who is also an individual. The written contract is also a very important means of establishing the existence of an employment relationship and the agreed terms in terms of dispute. In most countries, the use of written contract is required in the domestic work sector, while in some countries for all categories, in others not for all categories. Also the legislation in other countries, while not explicitly requiring a written contract, requires that employer provides a domestic worker a very clear statement, a written statement or letter of appointment specifying their terms and conditions of employment. For example, in Italy, there is a special clause at clause 6 of the National Collective Agreement for Domestic Workers. It requires the employer to provide the worker with a letter of employment setting out the particulars of the employment, such as the starting date, professional classification, place of work, remuneration, and other aspects relating to the employment relationship. Indeed, support also is needed to households to make formal employment arrangements by simplifying the registration. And again, this is the same written contracts. There can be a standard contract, model pay slips, these things that are made available for public use simplify the process. Again, we already spoke about our extension of social security and another important point, and again, I think that this is something that was addressed during the project and the plan of action, is the promotion of the professionalization of domestic work through skills training and salary scales to match certification and experience. And this is indeed another very important point. So what other measures can we were identified as global good practices is, for example, well, also the promotion of voice and representation of domestic workers and their employers, and because this helps to conclude social dialogue, to perform social dialogue, and to sign collective bargaining agreements, as in the example of Italy, where there is the national collective agreement for domestic workers signed. Also there are government support measures, or for example, in Mauritius, domestic workers earning less than a certain amount a month in aggregated wages have been exempt from paying their part of contribution to the pension scheme. So the government is paying their contribution, but because this is how it's organized in Mauritius, but the domestic worker does not. So in other cases, for example, fiscal advantages are offered to encourage the formalization of domestic workers and their affiliation with social insurance schemes. In Argentina, the General Confederation of Labor indicates that the government has taken measures to promote the formalization of domestic work through providing tax incentives for employers. So the government also promoted the rights campaign, as well as the inspection, the authorized inspection, because of course one of the major conflicts is about the privacy of the household and access of labor inspectors. So this was one of the decisions in Argentina. What else? So the system that I personally am familiar with since I lived in Geneva in Switzerland is the service voucher system. It is a scheme that makes it easier for private citizens to pay for services and simplifies the administrative formalities for both, because it is there is a voucher system. It is known as check service, and it simplifies the procedure for both the employer for domestic worker and the domestic worker, and it puts also an obligation while putting the obligation on the employer of the domestic worker to declare on behalf of the domestic worker the wages to the compulsory social insurance system. It is made in a way that is user-friendly and that can be easily followed by an individual, and there is the support that is provided to individuals to register with the system, as well as to understand how this works. So I think that this is where my presentation stops, and thank you for your attention. And once we go into the question and answer session, I'm also ready to answer questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm from the Ministry of Labour, Social Security, and I am representing the NIS department.
Yes, so that's all the plan.
Okay, first of all, you'd want to know who, according to our act, the NIS Act, who is described as a domestic worker. In the National Insurance Act, we describe domestic workers as persons who are employed to conduct work in and around the household for the benefit of the person who owns or resides in a home. They include the household helpers, chauffeurs, gardeners, nannies, cooks, and caregivers. Today, I'm here to tell you about the rights and responsibilities of the domestic worker through NIS. What are the rights of the domestic workers? Domestic workers have the right to come in and to know what is it that NIS has to offer to them as benefits. It is their right for their employers to pay, which should be a 50-50, meaning if our contribution stands at $250 per week for a domestic worker, that should split 50-50 between the employer and the employee. However, sometimes the employer doesn't want to do that. So we ask the employee, it is your contribution, you are going to benefit from it. So even if the employer doesn't want to do it, you should come in and get registered, start paying your NIS for you to benefit from our pension programs that we have. At NIS, what we try to do is try to reach out to all the domestic workers. We do also house visit, although in some areas we are not able to reach them because of the apartment complex. We are not able to reach them at that point. So what we do at some point, we are trying to raise the awareness of these persons, the domestic workers. So one of our things is that we are starting to do advertisement. We have started a dramatized advertisement that is not yet fully in place, but we have been doing radio programs. We have an article in the Star to reach out to the domestic workers themselves and in the Gleaner for the employers of the domestic workers. What we want to do is to get them on board because we have benefits for them. They are going to lose out because apart from the retirement benefits for them, we have the invalidity benefit. That is, if they are working and contributing to the scheme as a domestic worker and something should happen in terms of illness and they're unable to work again, then NIS is there for them to ensure that they can get a benefit whilst they are unable to work because of illness. Another part of it is that what if those persons for the maternity allowance that is unique to just domestic workers under the National Insurance Scheme. Because apart from the domestic workers, no other workers within private sectors or public sectors that NIS pay a benefit to, only domestic workers. And this is paid, it's a 8 weeks payment and it's a one-off. What will be, you can get it 6 months. You can apply for it 6 months before going off on your maternity leave. You can apply for it 6 months or 6 months after. But it's a lump sum and it is paid whatever the minimum wage is at that time. That is what we pay. In terms of how are we going about raising awareness to our domestic workers? As I said, we have been doing ads. But one of the things we want to do is to target the stratas to ensure that we are able to go in, talk to not only the domestic workers, but the employers as well. Because as I said, they should be a part of this to ensure that the domestic workers are taken care of. They are in the household market. It's only fair for them to get something when they stop working for them all these years. And these are the persons who do the bulk of work. They are the homemakers for you all along. So we want to ensure that they are taken care of when they stop working. In terms of as I said, what we have recognized is that we have about 45,000 domestic workers and only 3% of that 45,000 workers are registered with NIS and paying NIS for them to get a benefit. So as I said, as NIS officers, we are going out there, we are taking it to them to ensure that at the end of the day, they are okay in terms of getting their benefits from us. I had promised that I wouldn't be long, so any questions, you can just put it to me.
I have a question. What if the person is like old, like how would they benefit? Like they're like closer, they're retired, like retirement age, would they still have benefits?
Well, because they'll reach your retirement. If you are contributed less than 10 years, what we'll do is to give you a grant. Whatever the amount for NIS grant is at that time, that is what you get. But if it is that they are contributing 10 years or more, they'll be able to get a pension from us.
So it's pretty much just like the regular pension scheme then, pretty much in that regard. That's awesome. Yes, all right.
You had mentioned that there's a flat rate that household workers
$250 per week as it is now.
is supposed to be paid half by the employer.
Employer and half by the employee. Sometimes we'll say the employers are reluctant in doing it. So we ask the employees to do it for their own benefits.
And I understand that, but is there a penalty to an employer who does not pay? Because in informal employment,
All right, because of this transitioning that will be taking place, then that will be coming on stream. There wasn't any before, but we are considering that now. In terms of the whole transitioning.
About probably a health or medical assistance feature, is that something that can be enjoyed by the household worker contributing to the NIS?
NI Gold card, when they start getting the pension, they get the NI Gold card. Once you're a pension, you get that NI card, which is distributed by Sagicor.
Do you have to get to the pensionable stage before you can
Pension, or whether you get in the invalidity, disablement, whatever pension you get, that NI Gold card.
No.
So just to follow on Helen's question, the total is $500 minimum?
$250 per week. So it will be $75 from the employee.
Yeah,
$75 from them.
that's incredible.
it's
Jamaican dollar? Jamaican? Oh, so you're buying a stamp. Ah. Oh.
Dates that provide, and as I said, it is dated, so you just paste that NIS stamp in that form.
So, following up on this question, do we have a definitive date for the implementation of the penalty? Reason for that is that if the employer doesn't have that type of approach coming to us, it's going to be difficult for them. It will be difficult collect from them.
All right, in terms of the date, I am unable to say it.
Yes.
Because as I said, it is in a transitioning process now, where they are trying to put the action plan together, which would include that. So it's not something that I could give you a date.
All right. Also, second question I'm going to ask. Based on the fact that the minimum wage has been risen to a higher level, are we considering raising that amount?
You mean for the payment for the NIS?
Yes.
Well, it was recently, last year it was $200, and this year it is $250, because what we did was do it over a period of 3 years.
So
There's no plan,
the
no
new
to
rate,
increase
for
it.
the new rate of 9 votes, the minimum amount paid, floor condition, will be implemented in May. So is that taken in consideration with the $50 increase that you have to place?
No,
No.
it wasn't.
So you can say yearly, bi-yearly, but no, so yearly matters.
At the stamp, but we're really probably about 5 to 6 years at $100. Then we changed to 150. So we continue, as I said, it's up at 250. They didn't have any plan, there's no plan in place.
Lastly, what if any public education do we have to encourage people to join?
Yes, we do public educations. We have been out there, we're going to companies, as I said, we are taking the awareness. What some of the plans we have in place is to go into the squares within Kingston and St. Andrew, not only, but other parishes in which.
Tona, just
That in terms of seeing how best we can reach through the churches, through the stratas, and whatever groups you are involved in, we spread the word. We are able to do public education. We go out there, we register the domestic workers, not domestic workers, but see that we are targeting the domestic workers and bishops now. However, it's the domestic workers that we are emphasizing at this point. We're taking it to them in terms of registering them, telling them how they can distribute the stamp card to them.
And just a clarification though, let us go back to the rate, which is the new rate being $250. $450 in total, right?
For the week, it's for the
For the
week.
week, right? So therefore, the person, whether the individual or the employer would pay $125.
Yes, well, sorry.
Yeah, $125 qualify the individual for the benefit. I would think that's
Stamp, one stamp with it's a tone, you have a value of $250.
oh, so the
So it's not like that, the employer can give you the $125 and you don't put yours, because guess what? You won't be able to buy a stamp.
so the person has to pay the entire $250.
Right. However, as I said, some the employers are not willing. You as an individual, it's going to benefit you. Remember, you'll be getting a pension when you stop working. If you're sick and unable to work, you can get a pension. And again, we have the NI Gold card, which is the health card that is different from the NHF card and the JADEP card. That's a total different card. So the NI Gold card. Any other questions?
The NI Gold is only for the pensioners. Is there any, I think, Lorraine was asking about, I didn't get the answer. The only health insurance that exists is for the pensioners. You have nothing for current employees.
So working. So sometimes the companies are not talking about the domestic workers, but if you're working in a company, sometimes they provide those health cards. So what we provide is for persons who are retired.
I think we need to expand.
Yes.
I think we need to expand into that, because if you're able to do things like that, I think you get more persons on board wanting to contribute. Because even among employers, they will hold it out to persons. Well, we don't have to pay the NIS. And because it's a deduction, and persons see themselves as losing that pay, but if they can see the current benefits.
You're talking in terms of domestic workers are generally.
Domestic workers.
Currently work.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is something
that
they are
suggestion. Yeah.
Suggestion.
But if they are ill and they have to be away from work, they're really dependent on the good grace of the employer.
Right.
We should have something in place that they can actually contribute to.
I said, I will share the suggestion with the directors and for them to take it into consideration.
Do we have any questions from persons joining virtually?
No.
Any other questions here? I've noticed when you're talking about domestic workers, it wasn't limited to what we normally deem to be domestic workers. So we are talking about women primarily who work in homes. We used to call them, once upon a time, we would call them household helpers. And I think that was part of the problem, because people didn't view them as workers, they were helpers.
But at least on the NI Act, we include, like I said, the gardeners and chauffeurs, it's the same. It's the same.
So it's a gardener's chore. landscaper.
Right,
Oh.
the same for, you know, the 15,000, those, you know, they're
Yeah.
no longer gardeners.
Yeah.
They're landscapers.
Okay.
So, these persons really is the same.
So, but I think that this is anecdotal though. I think a lot of work has to be done with them because I don't think many of them are actually organized. Because at least household workers have their advocacy group, the household workers union. And I think the household workers union is established to be able to represent
Those.
those, but it seems like the majority of persons are what we call a traditional domestic worker. But I think some work needs to be done.
Well, that is what we are working on now. Up to last week Friday, we had a meeting in terms of taking the public education where and how we're gonna do it. So we actually started some of it. We're just getting on the solution and working on it.
There are some companies, registered companies, small groups that are providing an upscale type of household helping. Are they included? Are there room for them to be included? You know, you call a number and you call a company and they dispatch people who are fully trained, so to speak, and you know the customers.
Domestic engineers.
Yes. So, yes, I think a large group of persons who are experienced and in the household helping business for a long time are now going across, you know, to those.
What happened is that they would have registered
Yes.
with the company's office, so that information will be to us at NIS. That's where inspectors come in terms of the work being done. We go out, we find these companies and we ensure that they are paying for their workers.
Big business.
Right, so we ensure that they are paying for their workers. So that part of it is taken care of. But it's like the individual house to house is really the issue that we have at hand.
In light of that, then, how do you treat with those persons who come in one day for the week,
Day's worker,
day's work?
all right, for the day's worker, as again, it's something that both them and the employer would have to sit and talk about because they don't work the full week. So if it's a day's worker, it's up to them. Well, it could be the kind heart of the employer to help them, but it should be that the day's worker pay themselves.
So it's open not only to
The employee.
5 day per week persons, it's open to like part-time.
Right,
Yes.
the day's worker. So we just take them on, they are covered under the act as domestic workers.
Okay, I didn't know that, I didn't know that.
So that is part of my concern, that we need to publicize things more, you know, so the town meetings, whatever.
What's going on now, in terms of making the domestic workers aware of their benefits and how, and when we come in and how they can benefit from this.
Advertisement, but you need to plan. Area from and love it, big middle, the one that are popular out here.
We have been doing that, we have been doing that.
In fact, I remember, you know, Shirley actually indicated, Shirley Price actually indicated at one point that if they want to reach domestic workers, don't bother with the feeding.
No.
It's star.
Yes.
Yes.
For the domestic workers and one in between, for the employer of these domestic workers.
Program like a you know, a large group of those persons, huge listeners, you know,
Right.
they might go to the next one, True Life. If you listen to this program, you find a large block of these people listening, participating. So they communicate, will go far away, you know, in finding a stack of this. Yes, the programs that are relevant and programs that are connected to them.
Even the religious station.
Yes.
Yes, the religious station.
Yes, sir.
And in the hotline as we were.
Yeah.
Discussing.
Yes.
To check them through the hotline.
But My thought is with regards to the public relation arm of the, getting this information out. I'm looking at getting information to the various, we call them CBOs, the community-based organization, NGOs. You also utilize the same Zoom.
Yes.
Zoom,
We have been doing that in terms of the public education, and as I said, we have been going into communities. When we do go into the communities, some of the domestic workers are not able to speak to us. We're having that challenge. They are not able to speak to us. Sometimes the employer, they have cameras, so they know who come into the house and probably think they are complaining about them. So we have to be very careful how we go about this and just going as I said, majority of these is also now have cameras.
That in your outreach attempts, where you find that the challenges that the camp come into you for fear of the employer that they are being reported. Prepare flyers or pamphlets for with some basic information as well as inviting them to webinar or some program that you are partnering with.
Out there doing the radio programs, part of it. I said, put them in the box, and we don't know the time when some of them are not live in. So we know the time that they are coming home, sometimes target the popping area, ensure that, and as I said, we can't limit it to Kingston and St. Andrew, but we try to.
Central point.
Like the transport issue, we ensure that they will give out these flyers.
So that's question from Veronica. Can answer. There's a question from the online. Can you please go ahead? Veronica? Melody?
They raise hands.
Yes. We did. All right, you can go.
All right, just to make the point that if we as trade unionists who are on the ground, in the field, participating on a daily basis, are a little surprised of some of these news, means that there's need and there's room for better and stronger communication. So, we have to revisit the methods we've been using in order to communicate to the masses and see where we have shortcomings. Because that's what he's saying. I
can assure us that, that since this month, April, and going forward, we've been planning on going out full force.
I'm partnering, yeah?
Yes, we're partnering with
like the trade union,
the churches.
Yeah.
Face of peace now, so we have so absolutely a time slot, whether it's on a Sunday or
it's just that important.
It's on a Sunday. So we show them the importance of it, because if you're a member of a church and anything should happen, they're coming to the church for help. So this is a way of telling the church that, okay, this is a little burden off us now. So they should discuss it.
For another justice, that's an avenue that we could communicate some of these information. As you know, the amount of citizens that you would have seen regularly. Exactly.
Into the field, as we would call it.
Yes.
These workers are not able to reach us, they are not able to come. So, as I said, we just have to go meetings, but we are working on other ways of reaching them, because we have to reach them. We can't let them lose out on their benefits.
There's that.
The online.
Using up the social media, because most of them use the social media. So we're using the social media.
WhatsApp is probably
the most familiar one.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they were
right coming from. But with the text classes is something coming in. It's like when Ministry of Health have the COVID, send out these classes.
Okay, but I think you have some
Hello?
employers.
Yes, go ahead, Melody.
Okay, I'm having internet issues. Okay, quickly. My mother had applied for her pension for the over 2 years now. But when I keep calling to get an update, I was told that she will not be entitled to the pension because she have some outstanding stamps. I asked if I could purchase those stamps, but I was told that for the fact that they collect her documents already, I would not be able to do so. However, she would get the grant. And I'm still waiting. I don't hear anything since.
In terms of that, I couldn't speak as to what is the issue with it from here because it's something that I would have to check on the system and to see what is happening. But for 2 years, as I said, it was for 2 years. I'm not sure if possibly they are doing more internal search in terms of finding contributions because we're not quick on giving the grant when we try to search to see if the person had worked and contributed enough to pay them a pension. So that could be one of the reasons we are doing internal search, hence the reason the 2 years waiting.
Okay, because when I checked before, they said they had misplaced her file. So they asked me if I had the receipt that they gave me, which I did. So when I took back the receipt, they said they would fast track it for the fact they did apologize. So I don't know if that is another hold up again.
So that is something that I couldn't speak of on this platform. It would have to be something, information and check on it. From where I am, I'm not able to tell you what is happening.
This is not related to housing workers, but it may in fact apply to them, I'm not sure. I was hearing in some program a couple of years ago that if you had come to the pensionable age under the NIS Act and you had not applied for the pension, if you are going to apply for it at a later date, you could not get a full retroactive amount if it exceeded 4 years.
Based on the act, you only get 3 years back.
3 years.
You only pay in 3 years back.
I suppose the person has never realized.
It's 3 years back. We have to go by what we do.
So, could you say what is the argument that would support the fact that you don't get the full amount? What was the reason for it? Do you know?
In terms of the question that was asked online, possibly where they had worked, they didn't contribute to the scheme. It could be one of those reasons. The company had closed down. Sometimes it's the information that the claimant give us. Sometimes they work back in the days, they work in their brothers or sisters' name based on the age. So we have issues like that. Sometimes they're not providing us with the right work history.
I would just refer to one with the name of right now. So, let's not get the full amount.
Challenge. However, you wait and didn't apply. So you reach age 65, you stop working, and you wait until you're age 70. We would only pay you 3 years back retroactively. We would go to 5 years.
And that's what the law says.
That's what the law says.
It's factual.
The last thing is, in relation, if I have reached the age and I'm still working, can I apply?
The retirement age is age 70.
Oh, so if I'm still working up to age 65, I have to get to 70 before I can apply. Okay.
There's a final question from Shamir online. Let me ask, since the introduction of the discussion of the formalization of domestic workers, has there been any opposition encountered to this move?
Well, not that I know of, I don't know the trade unions, not any. But there hasn't been, not that I necessarily, not any.
The constitution, same.
Thank you. Want to wrap, Helen? Want to wrap up?
So in other words, you'll be recognized as a worker of the facility under your study.
Team retirement, so if you're working 871, we give it a pension once you reach 870.
Yes, yes.
Right.
But just knowing that people retire, then government presently at 60 and 65 and 5.
And when they retire, they usually go back to work.
Remember that's NIS caters for everyone.
Not only
including
that,
public,
exactly.
private,
Yeah,
self-employed.
Yeah.
So we couldn't top it at
No.
60.
yeah, exactly.
We are still young
Back
and
to
able
work.
to work.
And
Mhm.
actually,
There was a sister from there.
nowadays, in public sector,
Yeah.
it is
They're moving 365, they don't reach it. So,
Soon reach there.
Yes, yes.
There.
so if that is so, then why would, let's say, Major, the one called the name right now, quasi-government, retired people at 60.
Don't make him too late. You don't.
They don't miss it.
I could have stayed for.
Okay, so that means whatever.
no, I know this information that they,
Leave the politics.
although they are public sector workers. They were using the parochial officers' pension and pay them pension, but only in terms of the calculation, because under that act, it does not cover any other work about workers in the local authorities.
But any NIS should incorporate that arrangement.
Oh, no, we're talking about regular retirement, you know, not NIS retirement. For NWC workers, the only other thing that would be there is their contributor pension scheme, which has them retiring. Yeah.
All right, since there is no other questions, if it is that you need persons here or persons on the platform, if you have anywhere in terms of community that you want us in communication, we're always ready and willing to go.
Okay, well, that's good.
Very informative.
John.
Okay. Yes, so we have had both of our presentations, and I'm pretty sure we have all learned something that we never knew before we came here. And I think even when we leave here and we get a little chance to regurgitate and think, we will have more questions to ask. So Ms. Williams has made it clear that if we need the services of the NIS, they are willing to go out and do that kind of public education. Because in truth, a lot of workers who are not aware of the benefits, they may not want to participate because they just think it is a deduction out of their pay, rather than look at it as a benefit that they have to get, whether now or down the road. So that is some of the work that we as trade unionists have to do, because we know that when we are representing our members, pension arrangements are something we negotiate, not for old people, but for young people, because you have to prepare for retirement long before the retirement age actually comes. So, and we would have heard from Vera, the context within which we are looking at the issues having to do with formalization, because it's located in the International Labour Organization and the standards that they set in place. Those of us who were at the board meeting yesterday would have heard something about the unemployment insurance, and you recognize that it is also covered under a particular convention of the ILO as well. So it says to us that we have a lot more to learn, and coming out of sessions like these, we can actually tailor other sessions and seminars where we seek to educate and make sure our members are aware of the benefits that they can derive, that their employees who are domestic workers can derive, and that we actually stay within the law. Because the truth is, if they get to the point of putting in place penalties for persons, for employers who do not want to pay. Many of us may be in problems because we think we have an option, and it shouldn't be an option because from you, I know I have known domestic workers who have worked with families for years, 30, 40 years, and when they are retiring, well, many of them can't even afford to retire, they work there until death. Yeah. Because there's nothing in place for retirement. So we have to begin that process.
But the employer benefits when the employee pays, because in those situations, those employees also are looking for the pension.
Exactly.
So it does make sense that you help them to contribute as well.
We need to get that information all.
Absolutely.
As I say, are here as workers.
Yes.
But many of us employ domestic. Some of us may not.
You're going to get there before then.
Exactly. Well, then 1 day and 2 day. I certainly learned today that the 1 day and 2 day with the day's work can in fact make the payments. I have to know around that. It's something that you have to go there and spread the message and encourage persons to do. All right. So that being said, I think we would have learned a lot this morning. It says in terms of the sensitization and awareness raising, we now have a responsibility to carry the message even wider. And therefore, what it leaves me now to do is to thank everyone, those who joined virtually, those who took the time and the risk to be here face to face. But I don't think it would have been an effort that would have gone with you feeling that you have gained nothing. I think we have all gained from having been here this morning. And so, as I said, I want to thank everyone who joined both virtually and face-to-face, and look forward to the Confederation's next webinar, which is going to be targeting the general membership. And therefore, we are going to be asking and encouraging persons to get the word out. And of course, the link and so on will be available far in advance for that one, so that we can have proper time to organize everything. And we are targeting for that 500 members. I mean, the union movement organized under the Confederation, we have membership close to 200,000. So I think 500 is achievable if we really feel that this is information that all our members need to have. So again, thank you all. Looking forward to see you at the next webinar. And of course, we have to thank our technical support. He did more than he was required to do. And so we have to thank him. I mean, we are talking about an office that had been virtually unoccupied for 2 years. So a lot of things had to be put in place. And so we want to thank our technical support, because without him, it would have not been possible. Mr. George House of Bear Claw System. So we're doing some advertising for him as well. All right. So thanks again, everyone. And we look forward to see you at our next webinar.
Thank you.